Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ConnectWise monthly threat briefing for the month of June. It's crazy. It's already June. Can't believe it. My name is Rafael Marty. I'm the General Manager for Cybersecurity at ConnectWise, and I'm joined by Bryson, who has been with me for the last few times here. Hello, Bryson. How are you?
Hey, Rafi. I'm doing great. How are you?
Bryson is part of our threat intelligence team of the CRU, the ConnectWise Research Unit, and we're going to be discussing a little bit of the threat landscape and changes that happen. And I'm very excited about today's briefing because we actually have a special guest. Deepak, hello, how are you?
Hey guys, thank you so much for inviting me. Super excited.
Likewise, yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit about patching and keeping your systems up to date and what that has to do with the threat landscape. So really looking forward to that discussion. But let's jump in a little bit. Bryson, you've been looking at lots of threat data as usual, and you have some updates for us with regards to what's going on in the bad corners of the internet here.
All right. Yeah, let's go ahead and pull the slides up, and we'll just get started talking about some of the malware that we've been seeing lately. This is just a breakdown of the top 10 malware we saw in Q1 and Q2 of this year, or at least so far in Q2. The quarter's not quite over yet. We have tried to color code things here a little bit, so I don't expect everybody to have an encyclopedic knowledge of what every malware is and what it does. But the slices of the pie that are a shade of blue are info stealers. So those are malware that steals your passwords, looks for data on your hard drive to swap it out or to download it. The ones that are sort of a shade of purple are what we call RATs, or remote admin tools. So that would be software that the threat actors would install so they can remotely control your system. And the interesting thing about the RATs is they're, for the most part, legitimate tools. They're just used for malicious activity. So net support RAT, for example, this month we saw a lot of that, or this quarter. That's actually a legitimate tool that the threat actors have co-opted and been using a lot of. Async RAT is an open source tool, very similar. Legit tool that the threat actors are using. So we've been seeing a lot of those. The different shades of green, those are loaders. So typically when somebody gets installed with something, it's not just one piece of malware that gets installed. It usually starts with some kind of loader, some kind of dropper that first gets installed. For example, we've been seeing FakeBat recently. That would be, usually they come in through compromised WordPress sites. They pretend to be malicious software or pretend to be legitimate software. You download it and it's just a loader that then loads other things. Like it may then download an info stealer or a rat. For example, we've seen FakeBat dropping Net Support Manager. So a lot of these will go together. Have seen a little bit of ransomware, and then also the coin miner, XMR rig is something that we also see threat actors using pretty regularly. So if they're after money, it's either going to be, ransomware or coin miners trying to co-opt your system resources. So that's just kind of a breakdown of some of the malware that we see each month. The next thing to talk about is, of course, ransomware. So what we've got here on the left are, and this isn't just ransomware we've seen at ConnectWise. We're gathering intel from open source intelligence. We're gathering it from actual darknet sites. So anytime somebody gets compromised or ransomed, the threat actors steal their data and try to sell it online. And so we'll gather information from those sites as well. So that's where all these different sightings come from. And I think we talked about this a little bit before, but in 2022, ransomware went down because all the Russian hackers were busy with the whole Ukraine war. But by the end of 2022, they got back in the business. And last year in 2023, we saw almost double the amount of ransomware, successful ransomware attacks than we did in 2022. Now, this year, things have sort of evened out. they're a lot higher than we'd like to be, but we haven't seen a significant increase or decrease throughout this year. And as far as the most, yeah,
I got a couple of questions for you here. It looks like the May is very similar to last year. Do you anticipate like that big spike there in August 23? Do you think that's coming back, or what was the reason for the spike last year?
That spike was due to a specific vulnerability. That was the MoveIt vulnerability that came out last year. That was a file transfer system that had a pretty significant vulnerability, and I think it was CLOP was the ransomware group that compromised several hundred different MoveIt platforms and stole their data. So it was just a big group of companies that got compromised all at once due to a specific vulnerability. Usually when there's a big spike like that, it's something like that.
Yeah. There has been some news recently. One of the things I read about was the router compromises that happened at scale, but I guess it didn't come quite to this scale, and it was not really ransomware that was involved there, because it's probably pretty hard to drop ransomware on a router. But the other thing that I read about was there was a big takedown that they went through, where they took down a whole bunch of botnet operators in like the last couple of weeks or something like that. Do you know more about that? I don't remember the details of it.
I read about that. Yeah, that was right before Secure, and then Secure happened, and so I don't remember the details. But yeah, no, there was a big botnet takedown. I think some of the droppers from the previous slide, and I apologize, I didn't. I should have gone back and read through that to figure out which ones they were. But yeah, some of those, the loaders, would have been the things that were taken down. Those are the initial access that most of these malware start with. So yeah, there was a pretty big botnet, and yeah, I don't recall.
Yeah, and we might see something in the data for next month then, right? Like maybe the June is going to come a little bit down. It's going to be interesting to watch that over time. That's super interesting though. But I think overall it shows that, look, ransomware is still there. We still need to care about it. SMBs are still targeted, and we gotta make sure that we're protected from this stuff, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, one last thing I wanted to share. I find this a little interesting. One of the main things that we've been seeing, specifically for our partners and in the SMB space, that initial infection has been more and more driven by what we call drive-by compromises or drive-by downloads. So a lot of this is due to SEO poisoning and malvertising. So threat actors will, buy a bunch of ad space, and if you go to Google something, the first listing in Google is going to be an ad, and so that first result may be malicious. And what we're seeing is a lot of common files that like our customers will use. And what we're looking at here, there's 100 different file names here. I know they're all really, really small, but there are 100 names. But this is just one file. So we saw a couple of examples of this. I noticed there were a few names. So I went on VirusTotal, which is an open source intelligence tool, and they actually had a list of 100 different file names that were reported. So if you can't see all these, we've got things like NetBeans installer. I believe there's a VMware installer. There's some Microsoft Works file converter, advanced IP scanner. That's something we see being used a lot by our partners in particular, but we see threat actors targeting that a lot as well. There's Five Nights at Freddy's. I think there's Steam's installer, TeamViewer, AnyDesk. So all these different file names, but it's just one file. It's an info stealer, this Convagent. But you would, if you're looking for one of these things, if you want to download VMware, if you want to download AnyDesk, what a lot of people will do, you just get on Google, you search it, and then you click on that first result, and either between SEO poisoning and malvertising, very frequently that first result may end up in malware. So I just like to bring this up because we keep seeing it. I just want to remind people, don't just Google and click the first link. If you need to download something, make sure you know where you're getting it from.
I look at some of these names; they're really hilarious. Like Ice Age. I don't know that. I'm sure that's like some kind of a tool these days. But back when I was a little younger, there was a Sierra game that was called Ice Age, where you whatever. It just brings back memories. And I'm sure well, I'm not sure, but I would be a likely target. Is that, oh, that's cool. Let's install this, right? Fortunately, I have a Mac, so the EXE would probably not do much to my machine. But very interesting how the bad guys are consistently getting ideas and are trying to trick us into all kinds of things, right? And by the way, for everybody listening, we in our yearly threat report that we just put out about a month ago, we talked quite a bit about the SEO poisoning and things like that. So if you're interested in the topic, have a look back at our threat report that we put out there that has lots of details on some of these different attack methods.
Oh, I'd also like to bring up, if you want more info on that specific malware from that first slide, we do a monthly newsletter on LinkedIn. And one of the things that we look at are the top not ransomware, but just the top malware that we're seeing. And we do break down a little more technical detail, including updated indicators of compromise that we put out every month. So we'll drop the link in the chat so you can subscribe. And that's just a monthly newsletter you can get on LinkedIn with updated threat intel.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Every time I get it, I'm like, wow, there's like pages and pages that you guys write, which is fantastic. All right. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's bring Deepak into our conversation here. And welcome again. Deepak, what do you do at ConnectWise?
Sure. So in ConnectWise, I am responsible specifically under the CWRMM umbrella for patching and to some degree within network monitoring, but patching is the biggest part. So when I say patching, I'm really talking about OS patching and third-party patching. This is basically the big pieces that I'm looking into on almost on a day-to-day basis. So a lot of the information that I've collected, a lot of the items that I talk about is data that we review within CWRMM patching. We try to understand where partners need to improve in terms of their configuration, maybe in terms of our auto remediation, maybe errors that we are facing on our side. So my main focus really is on where I get the information is really from the CWRMM. I think a lot of our partners have a really good cybersecurity posture and obviously patching being a big piece of that. Having a good cybersecurity posture, right? So yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, that's basically my profile here.
Cool. Well, maybe for our listeners, like one of the things, like you get the often in your operating system or somewhere you get the notification, hey, update your software, right? Is there a difference between updating and patching, or like how would you define that?
Actually, a great question. So I think for the longest time, though, the way we sort of go with the traditional definition here is, right, your patches are specifically to address some bugs, some security fixes. Good example is security updates coming out from Microsoft every month. Maybe your browsers releasing patches for some vulnerability, and then your updates are, I would say, generally categorized as those quality of life improvement updates. You get new functions, feature functions within it. But I think over the last few years, things have sort of blurred, especially because of the different amount of vulnerabilities in place, and the different vulnerabilities out there that hackers are trying to exploit. What I see as a shift here is the lines have blurred. I think at this point, if you try to split hairs between what a patch is, what an update is, you may end up with a system that is compromised because you may not have read about an update which was technically also contained a patch, and we also have vendors sort of silently releasing certain updates which could have a bug fix for a security vulnerability. But I think in general, you know, the way to look, the way I look at it is the patches and security or patches or updates in general sort of have to go hand in hand. I don't think it would be in the current way, current world, splitting those into two pieces. Like I can do my patches but not do my updates may not be a great approach, at least from a cybersecurity standpoint.
Right.
There could be
And
stability reasons, and your client-specific reasons why you may not want a specific update. But I think from a general cybersecurity posture, the lines have blurred.
Yeah, and it's actually like working in the security field, right? Like lots of us, like you get questions from your friends, and they're like, "Hey, what do we do to stay secure?" And I'm sure all of us have their sort of top 4 or 5 things that we recommend people doing, and one of them is actually that I tell people is like keep your software up to date. It doesn't matter if it's your desktop, your phone, install the latest versions. Right? Like even my wife, I'm like every now and then I'm like, why is there a 5 on the update thing that you haven't updated 5 of the apps? Like do them now because there's security vulnerabilities there. But speaking of sort of when do you install patches, right? Like if we do a vulnerability scan in our environment, we might get hundreds or even thousands of vulnerabilities that show up. Now, sometimes it's just not even possible to patch all of them. Is there any recommendation on how to prioritize patching?
Sure. So there's a few different ways in which you should, anybody should be looking at patching. So I think if we have to make a sort of a little bit of a distinction, I would say we should, if you have tools and mechanisms and information to separate out, patches which have issues within them. So, good example is Microsoft patches comes out. These are patches which if you don't deploy them as soon as see them, you see some critical vulnerability, and you just click on deploy on all of your machines, or because for our MSPs, our TSPs out there, right, you're using some sort of a tool to deploy your patches. I know it sort of, when you're looking at a vulnerability, the general instinct is to go and deploy, update this on all of the endpoints. But I think there's a little bit of a testing aspect that comes into play here, making sure that you are, there is a need for urgency, but you still have to be careful on how you do this without impacting your client's business, right? So there's that aspect, which is making sure things are tested, take maybe few days. Obviously, if you're on CWRMM, you have the knock testing all of your patches, so it's a great add-on. But then if you're using a tool that doesn't give you any recommendation, try to make sure you have some subset of endpoints where you can think of them like pilot groups, deploy those patches, see if things are working, and then do a wider deployment. But beyond that, I think there does come an aspect of the patch itself getting deployed, and then the actual patch may be failing on an endpoint, which we see a lot on. If you look at the data on the CWRMM side, we do see a lot of data in terms of patches failing because of some systemic issues. So it could be a hex code, some H result error, something systemic on the endpoint, maybe a firewall blocked it. Very common thing that we are seeing. And what if we have that slide here? So if we can pull that up, I think we can take a look at just having more number of attempts in a month to have your patches getting deployed really helps mitigate that. And so this data that we're seeing here, this is something from Jan to March. We looked at CWRMM endpoints and specifically servers, because we didn't want your servers have high availability, so they are a good candidate to look at this information. So we looked at endpoints or servers which have more than 5 days of patching in a month versus the ones which have less than 5 days in a month. And when we do a comparison here, this is March data. If I do, if you see the trend here, you'll see there's a significant gap between the green line, that is more than 5 days, and the orange line. And at the end of the day, if you look at the compliance difference, that's about almost a 10% difference in compliance, which is actually a lot if you're talking about servers, which means there are patches which are supposed to be deployed because that is as part of your policy, but they're not deploying because you something failed at the at the end of the month, and you couldn't get that patch.
Help me understand, is that this does literally mean if I try deploying the patch or across all, like say I have 10 servers, and some of the red line is if I try less than 5 times in the month, say I just tried once, then it looks like only about 85% compliance of actually, so like 8-9 servers actually do get patched. There's 1 or 2 that will be missed. But if I try more than 5 times in this month, then I will actually get to 90% or 95% compliance. Is that how I need to look at it?
So maybe the better way to look at it would be from more of a scale standpoint. And the reason I'm saying scale is if we are talking from at an individual server, right? Maybe as a technician, you're going to that server doing the patching, so it's getting patched or what is failing, and then you can redeploy the patches. But then whenever you're deploying at scale, you're using some sort of a tool, and that tool may be using one of the two mechanisms that's available in Microsoft to deploy, and it fails. And the general expectation is it's a set it and forget it. You've set up your tool, you expect it to work, and within your tool itself, you have set up things in a way that it's less than 5 days. You would be less compliant in terms of the number of patches getting deployed. Versus a server where you have maybe more than 5 days. And I think a good example of that is the May patch cycle, where I think for Server 2019, May 14th, they released the cumulative update. And I think that cumulative update was failing because of language packs not being available on certain servers. So if you're not in loop of whatever's happening with the Microsoft patches, you would have missed or your endpoints would have failed patches because you don't know that on May 23rd, Microsoft re-released the patch, and they also released like a hotfix there. But if you had a policy set up in a way that you could do every week or every Saturday, Sunday, you don't even have to look at your tool, right? May 14th, patches fail, not an issue, and then end of the month, now you're patched.
I think the other thing is also statistical property here, right? Because say if I patch like once a month, right, and it happens so that I patch after Patch Tuesday from Microsoft, for example, then I'm out of policy compliance for the whole next month. If I deploy multiple times a month, I will catch that a little quicker as well, right? So, but I find it very interesting what you said too, in terms of, well, a patch might actually be faulty in a sense, right? Where, as you said, language packs or something like that, and then they put out a fixed patch that will then work on everything. So to catch that as well. And I think what that kind of brings up for me is on the vulnerability side or a vulnerability scanning side, we've come to a place where continuous vulnerability scanning is something that people are talking about a lot of, like, well, you just kind of like, you can keep scanning, right? Like maybe once a day or something like that. Is there a notion of continuous patching in a sense as well? That I remember back in the day, it was literally you had a one Saturday afternoon in the quarter, you had a patch window, right? And that's just when like literally people would go work on Saturday afternoon, and the thing they did is brought the floppy disks and put them in a machine and patched these things, right? Is continuous patching something that is a thing now, or like, are we moving towards that, or where are we with that?
No, I think you actually bring up a great point there as well, right? There was this general notion of patch Tuesday and then deployment Thursday that people used to follow. So yeah, we had like people had a day in the month where they used to do their patching. I think the way things have progressed, there is definitely a need to have more continuous patching. And when my definition of continuous patching would be just having that constant monitoring of patches or availability of patches and getting them deployed. So making sure you have the tools that allows you to do that, because at scale, again, the scale things matter. because for our TSPs and MSPs, right, that's where they would want to ensure that they are efficient. And over there, the general, I would say the general change in Notion needs to happen where I think with desktop, with laptops being the more general, device being used by end users, erratic timelines in terms of when they're online, you can't really set a window for when you want to be patched. We also have data around that shows that if you have a some sort of configuration that allows you to deploy patches as soon as some endpoints are available, that allows you for greater compliance. And then for servers, obviously you may not want to do that. And our general recommendation on CWRMM is to do your server patches over the weekend. So at least in a month, you would have at least 2 to 3 windows of deployment. So Saturday, sorry, not 2 to 3, but 2 to 3 within that month. And obviously you have the next month before Patch Tuesday comes in, right? And that way you have like 7 or 8 days to do your deployment, and it's a weekend, and it would have minimum impact to your end clients. And I know, right, this may not apply to everybody out there in the world. Like when I speak to partners, the fact, especially ones who have these once a month sort of a schedule, I do ask them to maybe educate their clients, right, of maybe having or increasing their number of deployment windows, try to get these machines up to date, because that would be causing them to be out of date. And like you mentioned earlier, right, you missed that window, and now you can't be patched till the next month, unless you deploy maybe your technicians or somebody to go look at it, which obviously isn't the most efficient way.
Yeah, interesting. One of the other things that I'm thinking about when I think about patching is Bryson's home environment, right? I'm picking him randomly here, but all of us, we're running IoT devices, right? Some of us a little more than others. Some have crazy robots and I don't know what in their garage. Like Bryson, what do you have? Like a cigar roller or something in your garage? Something that's hooked up to IPs or anything interesting?
No, but I've got a couple of Raspberry Pis that I do different things on at different times.
I guess the Raspberry Pis are probably a little easier. They're generally running a Linux operating system. You can probably patch them. I have a bunch of controllers lying around here that have different sort of ARM-based firmware and whatever. What do you do with those IoT or the thermostats or I don't know, routers, right? Like I ask people, hey, what's the last time you patched your router, right? What do you do with those other systems?
Yeah, with IoT devices, right, things get a little bit more complicated, and in some ways, it is a bit of a effort to profit sort of a ratio, right? The amount of time and effort that you spend to get those updated may not be immediately evident, but there is a need to get those updated as well, right? Especially the ones exposed to the internet. Unfortunately, with the number of devices, vendors out there, it gets really difficult. I think the general recommendation is if you have the way to get them updated, maybe some vendor provided tools to get machines, get those IoT devices updated. Get it updated. Don't wait for an incident to occur to then realize that, oh, you know what, all of these internet facing devices that I had are now vulnerable. My Wi-Fi camera is now vulnerable, right? So these things, I think, like there has to be some amount of time spent, but the way I see it, at some point it will become diminishing returns, because there would be devices that probably you may not be able to get updated at all, or the effort to get them updated will be really hard. And I know a lot of the viewers may not like that answer, but that's unfortunately the case, right?
I think maybe I probably have a couple other recommendations, but like I think having a network vulnerability scanner that understands a lot of these devices, at least identify them, know that you have them, right? So that you're, oh, wait a second, there's this other Arduino sitting around here that might be vulnerable or something. Then actually, funny enough, in preparation for this call today, I actually did quickly log into my router to see if there is a new firmware available. And for some reason it was running on the latest. I think it just auto updates it, which is fantastic. So maybe as a call to action, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and also, recommend, things like network segmentation. We see DVRs in particular get compromised a lot, but you can segment off that DVR from the rest of the network, put it behind a firewall. There's no reason why your DVR should have RDP sessions being launched from it, things like that. Threat actors will use that as their launching point. So just blocking it off, only giving it the access it absolutely needs to run, those types of things will also help a lot.
Thank you. Yes. And this is probably a great point in time where if you don't know what a VLAN is, it might be worthwhile investigating that a little bit. And as you said, sometimes I call it virtual patching, right? Where you put firewall rules in place that don't expose certain devices. That's another thing that definitely check your firewall configs every now and then. Make sure that holes that you poked in there are actually closed again, right? Which is one of the biggest reasons why you get compromised, because there's some kind of configuration. Like we all have done it, right? You add a firewall rule that lets you do something remotely because you needed it, and then you forget to remove it, and suddenly your network is exposed. Maybe
actually, that's a great point.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, because with IoT device, as I was saying, right, it's not as much as the device itself, but the environment in which the device has to be set up in a way that it's secure, so that the access to the device, so that way you're not investing in getting the device itself updated if you don't have the means or don't have the tools, but the environment itself is secure enough that nobody can reach that device, right? So yeah,
and the device can't reach anything else, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe last question, Deepak. How do you measure good patching?
That's probably $1 million question as well, because I don't probably literally, because when we try to go from a product standpoint, when we're trying to create some sort of a scoring or gamification or some way to do a measurable count of how well you're patching, it gets really difficult, because you can have some sort of a basic measuring, of something is supposed to be there, but it's not there. But then when you really think about it, right, because you're missing maybe an update rollup, it's not the same as you're missing a security update, right? Because if you're just if you just do a simple check or simple maths, you'll see, oh, you know what, I'm just maybe 90% compliance. I'm missing 10% because that one patch is missing. But turns out that one patch is a security update, and now you are vulnerable, and technically you're 100% not compliant. And this is where I think the way to measure would really depend on what your intents are. I feel if your main intent is to be having a great cybersecurity posture, I think the part that you may want to focus on is making sure all your security updates are in place. You have the tools to identify, detect that you have a vulnerability, and then you have the tools to get those vulnerabilities patched. And that's I think that's how you would want to measure. And obviously, having a way to check every now and then if but on regular basis if these machines are being patched, right? These three things together, I think, can set up a great way of patching.
And I guess even if we can't get to the perfect metric, having some kind of heuristic, at least to say how many machines are patched based on the latest, or are running on the latest version of whatever is available, right? I'm actually really surprised that the security community hasn't come up with a standard yet for measuring patch or compliance or something like that. Like we have CVSS for the vulnerability management scores. I haven't seen a patch compliance score or something like that. I'm sure someone is working on that. Anything else you wanted to add, Deepak, on patch management that we haven't discussed yet?
No, I think we did cover a good bit. I would be interested to understand, so even from a vulnerability standpoint, right? We within the Azure platform, we have our vulnerability management and now patching now working together as part of the Azure platform. From your standpoint, how do you see, the partners, or not just our partners, but even from a in general, from an industry standpoint, partners using vulnerability management as part of patching, patching as part of vulnerability management? Do you see that as something that folks are using within a single tool, or is it more split across different software stacks, because now they are, somebody does vulnerability management better, but maybe not good patch management, or vice versa, or something like that? It's very curious on that.
Yeah, I like the question. I'll answer it in a little bit of a roundabout way. If you look at security,
I hate to put you on the spot over there.
No. In the security space, like, we all have this sprawl of tools, right? We're using so many different tools to do one thing: keeping our customers secure. And unfortunately, patch management has grown up in the networking side, or in the NOC, right? Like, or even on the application side, like patching machines has traditionally not been a security function. The security function was to the checks and balances of vulnerability scanning, making sure that we understand what's there and what is vulnerable, and then you kind of toss the ticket over to IT or the NOC or whatever, and they would patch, right? And I think there is one disconnect that makes it so that we still have these two areas of one detects and the other one is going to go and fix it, right? Now, with ConnectWise, we actually address this by the fact that in our vulnerability tool, you can kick off a workflow that uses the patching capability that you're responsible for and automatically patches the vulnerability, even upon just finding it. I think this is overall a trend in cybersecurity that we're seeing, that we're starting to combine all these tools together. And it's actually one of the things that you just mentioned, at the ASIO platform, which is our shared platform that we're using across all of our different products across ConnectWise, where we're tying these different tools together so that it's one experience, and you don't have to configure integrations between point products and things like that. But you're actually creating a system where you're looking at outcomes and end-to-end use cases rather than features and individual tasks, right? Nobody wants another ticket that they have to action on. Why don't we just take care of it? And we see more and more MSPs really making use of that capability to start automating the workflow around that. So, great question. All right. With that, again, thank you for joining us today, Deepak, and thank you, Bryson, for, as always, providing some very interesting stats. We're going to be back in a couple of months with the next iteration of our threat briefing. It's going to be middle of summer. It's going to be interesting whether the hackers are going to go on summer break as well, or like last year have a summer feast with some new vulnerability coming out that's going to have create a spike in attacks. What's your prediction, Bryson? What do you think is going to happen within the next couple of months here before the next briefing?
Summers are always busy, so it's going to be busy. We're going to have a lot to talk about.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to that. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Hope you learned something, and see you next time.